Bernie Madoff is the face of financial wrongdoing on an epic scale. His family destroyed by his lies. One son became convinced he could never recover. In her new book, The End of Normal, that son's wife, Stephanie, asks the questions we all want answered. Why would a father lay waste to his entire family? And what would make a son feel he had no choice but to pay for the sins of his father? Everything was perfect on October 23, 2004. The designer gown, the well-heeled guests. Even the Harlem Boys Choir flown into the exclusive island of Nantucket to serenade the bride. Because what you're seeing here isn't just any wedding, it's the wedding of Stephanie and Mark Madoff.
I was so happy that day. I was just so happy to be Mark's wife.
Stephanie was 30 and finally convinced she'd found her soulmate in Mark. He was 40, a divorced father of 2, handsome and rich. He was more than a millionaire. He was the son of the legendary Bernard Madoff, the mighty money man of Wall Street. But to Stephanie on that night, Bernie was just her unassuming father-in-law.
I was dancing the whole night. And I remember at one point I looked off and saw him to the side, and I just sort of pulled him on the dance floor and was dancing with him. I think I shocked him by pulling him out on the dance floor like that.
He was doing the white guy shuffle.
Right,
Probably
exactly,
biting his lip if you look closely.
Yes.
But what Stephanie didn't realize was that she was dancing with the devil.
He stood there at my wedding watching everyone dance, and he knew that everyone in that room was going to get screwed.
It is the same Bernie Madoff that you saw splashed all over the media as the most hated man in America, the mastermind behind the biggest Ponzi scheme in history.
One of the most difficult things for me is to figure that out, like how one person could be such a sweet guy and then be such a monster at the same time.
All 3 Madoff men worked together here in Midtown Manhattan. Bernie ran his hedge fund business on the 17th floor. Mark and his younger brother Andy were 2 floors up, running a separate stock trading business they'd started. But for all the financial success, Stephanie fell in love with Mark's decidedly un-Wall Street ways.
Did he talk money?
Never.
Was he
Never.
showy?
Not showy at all. He was just a genuinely nice, sweet, sensitive, handsome man. And he was, see, now I'm gonna cry.
Okay.
It was that sensitivity that attracted Stephanie, then a 27-year-old college grad from New York who was working for a fashion designer. And it was time to meet Mr. Right.
Friends are getting married, friends are coupling up and moving off.
Yes.
What is Mom saying?
Mom is saying, take any date you can get, Stephanie.
One blind date led to romance and then marriage.
You may kiss the bride.
Stephanie was now a part of the Madoff family and found an instant closeness with Bernie.
He was quiet, but there was something very sweet about his quietness. I didn't find it to be odd.
But what was odd was that this famed master of finance who had fought his way out of poverty with his smarts seemed uninterested in anything serious.
What seemed to interest him?
I never saw Bernie read a book. I never saw Bernie read a newspaper. He didn't really have meaningful intellectual conversations ever.
On the other hand, Ruth, his sweetheart since childhood, always had plenty to say.
Ruth was hilarious. She instantly made me feel comfortable.
Now, he may have been the big name, but she was the big personality, Ruth, right?
Yes, cracking jokes all the time.
At Bernie's expense?
At Bernie's expense, yep.
The Madoff family was clearly enjoying the good life. Traveling on private jets, a villa in the south of France, a home in Palm Beach, Florida, where Bernie kept Bull, a 55-foot vintage yacht. While Stephanie and Mark lived downtown, his parents lived here, a $9 million Park Avenue penthouse with a wraparound terrace, or here in Montauk, in their beachfront mansion. They could buy whatever they wanted, something Bernie showed off to Stephanie one day in a fancy store.
He came in and said, anything she touches, she gets. And I said, Bernie, you're crazy.
Yes, things were very important to Bernie Madoff, and Stephanie says he was compulsive about organizing his collections, like his 17 Rolex watches or his 100 pairs of Belgian loafers.
Bernie was a total neat freak. Everything had to be perfect. All of his clothes were perfect, shirts color coordinated, perfect shoes lined up. Everything had to be totally clean.
And when it wasn't, an ugly side of Bernie came out.
I was really turned off by the way they treated their housekeeper. It's all they talked about was how poorly she cleaned the house. I think they would even mock her Spanish accent.
There was something more troubling about Bernie, his obsessive secrecy about his private fund and how he managed such remarkable returns for his clients.
Mark and I love
It was, Stephanie says in her book, a source of tension between father and son.
Every single fight was about the same thing. He said to me, Stephanie, I don't have any clue what my father does. And I just want to know what happens if he dies, what I'm supposed to do. And Bernie would always say the same thing. You do your job and I'll do mine.
Then came the fall of 2008. The stock market crashes. And it seems so does Bernie. Mark fears his father is ill.
He said, Stephanie, he just sits in his office all day staring at the ceiling. And I walked into the office, and there was Bernie in his office, staring at the ceiling like this. And he just stared at the ceiling the entire time.
Then something even more strange. Stephanie decides to tell Papa Bernie and Granny Ruth that she and Mark are pregnant again.
They loved their grandchildren, loved them.
With their first child, Audrey, there was champagne and celebration. But not this time.
Ruth shouted, hey, Bernie, Stephanie's pregnant. Bet you never saw that one coming, huh?
You thought there was something off in them.
Why wouldn't they be over the moon to have another grandchild?
But looking back, what do you think?
I think Bernie knew I'm going to ruin another life.
That life, and so many others around the world, were about to be shattered, and Stephanie and Mark would be caught in the eye of the storm.